Welcome to A Drink with the Idler. Now, I know there are loads of Claudia Hammond fans here, loads of people who are new to A Drink with the Idler. So I'll tell you a little bit about us. The Idler is a magazine edited by Tom Hodgkinson, who is here. You'll meet in a second. Tom, say hi.
Hello, everybody. This is the magazine, The Idler, in case you're not aware of it.
And it's also an academy, which I can share a link to you later, with lots of online courses now. In fact, we've been making online courses for a long time, so we are in the right place for lockdown. Loads to browse there. And today we're going to be talking to our special guest, Claudia Hammond, about a very relevant subject for idlers, rest. So Tom and Claudia will be chatting in a minute, but we're going to kick off with our weekly dose of philosophy from Dr. Mark Vernon. Mark.
Thanks, Victoria, and hello to everybody. I try and give a little few minutes that I hope act as a kind of springboard for the conversation that Tom and Claudia will have. And link it a bit to now as well. Maybe rest doesn't really need any linking to now as a gathering of idlers, as Victoria says, but also, you know, in a time where have we got too much rest? Have we got not enough rest? You know, what's your lockdown experience? So the nature of rest and how to actually do it clearly does matter. And I'm sure that Claudia particularly is going to say a huge amount about that practical side. But when I was thinking about the philosophy of rest, it sort of occurred to me that to enjoy rest, you have to believe in rest. And I don't mean as a kind of possible option for a Sunday afternoon, but does rest really even exist? Is it something that you can drop into? Because it feels like if rest isn't a kind of default state of being, then you can't actually have it. You know, you can't do something to rest. You can't work harder to find a resting state. You can't pour more energy into your quest for rest. It's something that emerges when activity and effort and so on somehow ceases. So I thought it needs to be a kind of pre-existent thing, almost like a baseline of being that actually emerges when activity drops away. So this felt to me like the kind of philosophical question of the week. Whatever else practical tips and hints and discoveries emerge over the course of the next hour, do you believe rest actually exists? Is it at the heart of existence itself? Now, when I thought further, I thought probably most humans for most of history have actually believed that that is true, that rest is somehow the ground of being. So if you went to India, for example, you would be told by at least some people there that Satchit Ananda is a way of capturing the essence of reality, the ground of being. The three words that mean something like conscious being leads to peace, Satchit Ananda, and peace is a kind of rest. So they would argue that rest can be really had because it really does exist. If you've done any of our philosophy courses at the Idler, particularly those referring to Plato, you'll know that Plato thought that time, activity, movement, and so on, is what he called the moving image of eternity. And whatever eternity is, it's a kind of gathered stillness, a kind of whole view that's so expansive that nothing actually moves within it because it all has a place of rest within it. If you're a theist of one sort or another, a believer in God of some kind, you might well have heard the expression that there's such a thing as perfect peace. And perfect peace comes about when your mind and God's mind are somehow one mind, again, a sort of essence or heart of being. So I think that's why rest is this kind of perennial subject that keeps returning. Incidentally, it made me wonder whether this is why reading comes number one in Claudia's book, the survey that she uses. Reading is thought to be the most restful thing. And I wondered if there's something in that that links back to these older traditions, because reading is a kind of movement of the mind rather than a movement, say, of the body. And word of course, is quite a theistic word too, the I am, the divine word. So maybe the reason why reading has this quality of restfulness is it's almost like a step back towards this sense that rest actually lies at the heart of being itself. There is, of course, one period of history, one group of human beings that haven't been convinced that rest is at the heart of all things, and that is our age. I think we don't actually believe that rest really does exist, which is why we perhaps struggle to find it. You know, we're told that no, it's survival of the fittest that really matters, or we're told that even nothing is a quantum vacuum, which is a hive of activity, of things springing in and out of existence, sort of the opposite of rest. I'm a psychotherapist, and there's quite a big strand in psychotherapy that says, no, 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 it's a kind of unconscious craziness that we're constantly trying to deal with when we're dealing with our minds and our psyche. So I did wonder whether that is part of the problem we have with rest, that we've kind of lost touch with this older, perhaps more expansive sense that rest is not something to be achieved, it's something to be discovered, you might say, something that emerges when we let go of everything else. And perhaps that is part of our wrestling with it today. I don't know, Claudia, whether that really chimes with your discoveries, Tom, whether that makes sense to you, but hopefully it's a springboard at least for the conversation you will now have.
Well, thanks, Mark. Claudia, are you there? Can you say hello to us?
Hello everybody. Hi. I love the fact that this event, everyone's got their cameras on and you can see people and where they are. It's so nice. It's like really being with people. It's like a real event, a real audience. It's lovely.
Where are you? Because you look like the Coldplay song, very sort of yellow.
Yeah, it does look like, for some reason, like I've got an Instagram filter. So this is the room I work in, and for some reason in the evenings on screens it always looks very yellow, although it doesn't seem yellow while you're in it. It's probably some setting deep inside my computer that happened long ago. In the daytime it's absolutely fine and looks normal, but in the evenings it just looks yellow. So I've just got used to it really now.
Yeah, well, we're getting used to it too. It's a lovely effect. This is your book, The Art of Rest. We just heard Mark Vernon there talking about the idea that rest doesn't exist, and I think you do actually talk about that in the book at a certain point. The book's lovely, by the way, everybody. It's a properly researched psychological book of research and advice about rest that was based on a massive survey you did, Claudia, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. So I was part of a group who we occupied the top floor of the Wellcome Collection in the middle of London for part of a couple of years, looking at the topic of rest. And everyone said, oh, that will be easy. You can just lie around. We didn't lie around. We did procure a hammock, but visitors always lay in the hammock, not us. But one of the things, and we have musicians and poets and philosophers and geographers, all sorts of people looking at rest from different perspectives. But one of the things I really wanted to do was to find out, well, what do lots and lots of people think about rest? And so with psychologists who were part of it from Durham University, they created the rest test, which was an online survey which we launched on All in the Mind, my Radio 4 program, and on Health Check on the World Service, the other program I do. And we then waited to see, would people be interested in this or not? And in fact, 18,000 people took part and were interested in the subject of rest, which was very, very interesting to see. And we asked them all sorts of things about how they rested and how much rest they got, what other sorts of activities they were doing.
And that really forms the basis of the book, which is structured into 10 parts, 10 chapters, different kinds of rest. There's one very, very obvious omission, isn't there, Claudia? It's something that all of us do. You're doing it now. I'm doing it. A lot of us are doing it on this Drink with the Idler. It's
Drinking.
Beer.
Yes.
Yeah. Now,
yes.
Why isn't beer in the book?
That's true. So what I've done is I've one of the things we asked people was what activities they found the most restful. And you see, it's the most restful, not the most enjoyable. And so then I've counted down the top 10 you know, Friday now, used to be Sunday, chart style, going down from 10 to 1, looking at each of those activities and why they might be restful. And so what I've written about is those top 10. And what is interesting is the things that don't appear in that. So drinking socially came at number 20, chatting came at number 19, socializing came at number 13, sex was down at number 22, eating at 21. So because it's not about what's enjoyable, it's about what's restful. And so drinking, I'm afraid, doesn't make it in there. There are quite wholesome things actually that are in the top 10. And really interestingly, the top 5 things are all things that people tend to do on their own. And so I think something that seems to be really key to the essence of rest might be getting away from other people, that we want some time on our own and some time that's chosen time rather than lonely time. Because whenever you are with other people, you've got to consider them in some way. You've got to think, well, what do they want? What are they thinking? What should I say next? And maybe to truly relax, you need to be without those people for a while.
But that could also lead to sort of brooding and sort of contemplation of the dark sides of the world.
Yeah, it's true. And so it's interesting that daydreaming or mind wandering came at number 8. And so lots of people say that they do find daydreaming restful. And when you look at all the research that's been done on daydreaming, it is mostly beneficial. A daydream, doing a bit of a daydream, although obviously you get told off for it at school, is you know, absolutely fine and seems to relax people. It also seems to aid creativity. It helps people to then pay attention afterwards. So it has all sorts of benefits. The time when it doesn't is, as you say, is if people are what's known as ruminating. So if people are thinking about negative things, either in the past, which might just be that day, you know, worrying about the thing that you said to somebody, or worrying about what will happen in the future. If the daydreaming is negative and you're not enjoying it, then that doesn't help well-being in the same way. But when it's positive, to just think about other things like that is fine. And there are even theories that the reason we daydream is to even about bad things, is to work out what we would do when those happen, to rehearse them in a way. So if you're, you know, when they do the emergency instructions on a plane at the beginning, then, you know, I'm sure I can't be alone in imagining, well, what would happen if the plane crashed, and can I really get out on down that slide? And what use is my whistle and bell really going to be, with the whistle and the light really going to be in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean?
Yeah.
But in a way, that might be that we are rehearsing for what would we do if that happened, and that then when something does happen, you can almost use those rehearsals. Or, you know, people will imagine what happened if someone they know dies, and or being told that news even, and things like that. Obviously, if you're doing that all the time, that's not going to make you happy. But a little daydreaming is fine and restful.
A little bit of sort of practical daydreaming that could sort of help you to decide how to cope in certain situations. Now, let's just go back on the top 10. Now, reading between the lines, you got number 10 is mindfulness, i.e. sort of meditation, Buddhist meditation. You don't seem to be a massive fan. Is that true? I mean, that you sort of, at the end of the chapter, you kind of say, yeah, it's okay. Do it if you want. I wouldn't probably do it.
Yeah, it's not that I'm against it. And sometimes people will say, oh, you're really against mindfulness, aren't you? That is not true at all. And people could count anything in this. So people might count, you know, could count mindfulness, meditation, praying, whatever they wanted to inside this. And all I think is that sometimes mindfulness has been presented as a bit of a panacea, that a kind of, if only every school taught mindfulness, and if only there was mindfulness in every prison, and if only there was mindfulness for everybody with depression, it would all be all right. And I just think it's really interesting when you look at the evidence. So there is some good evidence for certain things. So there is at Oxford University, there's a Centre for Mindfulness that does really excellent research. And one of the things that they have found there is that mindfulness does seem to be particularly useful for people with depression if they've had 3 or more episodes of depression at different times. Mindfulness isn't in their trials as useful if people have only had depression once or only had depression twice. It seems to be if people have had it 3 times. And this is a very sort of structured therapy sessions that they would have in a group, where people go for 2 hours a week for 8 weeks and practice a lot in between. They have to practice at least an hour a day in between. And so it's a mindfulness-based therapy. And that does seem to be beneficial, but as I say, only if people have had the repeated episodes. And that might be because if people have had repeated episodes of depression, they probably are those people who are ruminating more, and that's where mindfulness might be particularly useful if you're trying to still your mind and people and learning to watch those thoughts come and go. But I think it's a really good idea for anyone to try it, and to have a go. And I also think that you don't have to do it, but perhaps we can take some of the good things from mindfulness, and so to you can be doing, you haven't got to do it sitting in the room trying to do nothing at all. You can walk along the street mindfully and look at the trees and notice the cracks in the pavement and notice all sorts of things around you, and that can still your mind as well.
To just sort of remind you to be back in the present and just kind of be aware.
Yeah, and to think through what each of the 5 senses are, you know, what each of your senses are, what you can feel and smell. I mean, you can wash up mindfully, you know, and that can be quite relaxing too. You can really think about those suds of soap on your hands and what do they feel like, and what does the water feel like, and what does it smell like, and that, you know, that can be useful too, to try to still your mind a bit. And some people absolutely love it. You know, some people do find it is really, really beneficial. What is lacking is studies showing which people it's beneficial for, so that you could predict, this is what would be ideal, to predict in the first place whether this is going to be for you or not.
What, so you would sort of like upload your personality type, and then someone would say, yeah.
If you could work out, out that, say, it was better for people who scored high on anxiety, or it was better for people of a certain personality type, then maybe you could work that out. Just as we know that it is particularly useful for people who've experienced depression more than 3 times. And so, but I do think it's definitely worth people trying it, because some people will love it. And the difficulty is that you have to, it's, you know, everyone finds it really hard at the beginning, and you have to persevere. And, you know, that can be difficult.
Well, that brings us to Mark Vernon's point earlier, which I think you do address towards the end of the book, as I said at the beginning of this. If you're, you know, could trying to rest become yet another job, another piece of work, another source of stress?
Yeah, and that's the last thing you want it to be, as another thing to add to your to-do list, to think that, because I think one of the problems is that we put too many pressures on ourselves, that there are too many things that we think we should be successful at. So as well as people thinking about their jobs and their relationships, they're also thinking, oh, you know, they need to be fit and they need to cook amazing meals when people come round. And so what you don't want is to add another thing to that by thinking that rest is something you must
like rest is a sort of competitive sport, which I think it has become for some sort of Silicon Valley leaders.
Yes.
They compete about how much sleep they've got and stuff like that.
That's right. And so I think rest needs to be it needs to be chosen and intentional, and it needs to feel restorative. And if it's not feeling restorative, then that isn't restful. And it needs to be temporary. And I think this does fit in with Mark's point about, does it exist? I think in one way it only exists in terms of what it's in opposition to. And so what we need are the rhythms of rest and activity. And one of the things that we looked at was how much rest people had the previous day and their well-being. And we found that if people had, say, a very small amount of rest, say 2 hours rest, or 1 hour's rest, their well-being was on average lower. But it also was lower if they'd had a lot of rest. So if people had 10 or 11 hours of rest, then their well-being was also lower, which might suggest that those were perhaps people who were unemployed and didn't want to be, or perhaps ill and couldn't go out and couldn't do other stuff. So it's not the case that the more rest, the better. Because in a way, if you think about something like being in prison, people get to rest an enormous amount of the time. And, you know, at the moment, people are in their cells 23 hours out of 24 resting. That's not making people happier and feel better. So it is all about what it's in opposition to. Sorry?
The rest has to be voluntary.
Yes, it has to be voluntary. And I think the problem is that enforced rest is never going to be restful and can make you rest less. And I think that's interesting when you think about the pandemic. So people who've been furloughed, and particularly during the first, long lockdown, then suddenly you could say, oh, how lovely, people had time to rest. And it didn't feel like that for some people, because suddenly they had, they couldn't do a lot of the things that they wanted to do, and had this rest enforced on them, which is difficult.
Now, Claudia, where did this, at the Idler, obviously, we've been looking at the work ethic. Why do we feel the need to work so hard? So where does this kind of antipathy, if you like, towards rest come from, do you think? And also, I'd be really interested to hear what you can say about the 9 to 5 and jobs, and sitting in. This is why I got into the idea in the first place. I just couldn't stand sitting in an office under someone else's control from sort of 10 till 6 or 7 in the evening. But my moods were going up and down during the day. I felt tired after lunch. I wanted to go for a walk, but I wasn't allowed to act naturally, if you like.
Yeah, and I think that's really difficult. And of course, so obviously idling and resting have an enormous amount in common. And you were, have been, early to the in on this game. And so in a way, I don't need to tell you about resting because you're the idling expert, and I've looked at it for so long. But I think that it is interesting that that how this has changed over the centuries. And so that 19th century, gentlemen of leisure, usually Welsh gentlemen, would be showing off about going off to their country house and hunting and doing those sorts of pursuits, and then coming back to their club in London, and they would show off about not being busy and
not having to work.
Not having to work, was a real status symbol. And now, say, if you look on Instagram and look at, the richest celebrities, sometimes there'll be pictures of them on beaches, doing nothing, on holiday, having a nice time. But frequently, they are showing what they're doing all the time. They're showing what they're doing. They're showing what they're doing. And I think busyness has become this badge of honor and something that seems to give us status. And there've been some really clever experiments about this. There's a researcher in the States called Sylvia Bellessa, who's done experiments where they give people fake Facebook status updates of somebody called Sally Fisher, and she's made up. And they give some people updates that say things like, I've just got 10 minutes for lunch. Or at 5 on a Friday, it says, I've got loads more work to do, no chance of me going home yet. So that's busy Sally Fisher. And then other people get given not so busy Sally Fisher, and she writes, I've got an hour for lunch. Or at 5 o'clock, she writes on a Friday, she says, that's it, that's no more work till Monday morning. And then they ask people what they think of her. Interestingly, they don't say that her status updates are a little bit boring and that there's really no point in saying that, but never mind. They say instead that they think that busy Sally has higher status. They think that she has a more interesting job. They think she's better at multitasking. They attribute all these good things to her just on the basis of whether somebody had 10 minutes for lunch or an hour for lunch. Yeah. And now, of course, I think it's extraordinary that, it has to be your birthday really to take a lunch hour. If you took a lunch hour every day, people would wonder, well, where has she gone? What's going on? That's got.
Yeah, we used to take like 2 or 3 hours for lunch in the 90s. That was really good.
Yeah, and I can remember going to the pub on a Friday lunchtime. When I first worked in local radio, we always used to go to the pub on a Friday lunchtime and stay there and then come back. I mean, now I wouldn't dream of doing that and drinking and coming back to work again.
Well, what about your day? Don't you find you have ups and downs? And we can't quite see your whole workroom where you are, but is there a couch or a sofa in there?
There is a sofa behind me, which can become a bed. I have tried really, because I really love sleeping. I would love to have an afternoon nap every day, but I absolutely know that if I did that, it would just be fatal. I mean, I would just never get any work done. And I have too many things I say yes to. So I don't do that, but I would really love to do that. And I would definitely do that one day. When I'm older, I will definitely have a sleep every afternoon, because I think it's a lovely thing to do.
Don't you find you sort of drift off after lunch though? That must be a common thing, the sort of postprandial dip.
Yes, well, I'm tired in the mornings really, because some people are larks and some people are owls. I like the afternoon best. So if I was choosing, say, when to do something really difficult, I'd do it in the afternoon. I'd do a job interview, say, in the afternoon, or I like this time, and I'd happily stay up for hours, chatting now. Whereas in the mornings, then, but I'm tired all the time in the morning. I'm exhausted every morning when I wake up. So yeah, I have the opposite of that dip. But I think that the trouble is that we don't allow ourselves the breaks anymore, so let alone the lunch break. Even a short break, people will often come straight back to their desk. And there's been lots of research done on micro breaks, which are 2-minute breaks where you might just, lean your head back in your chair and shut your eyes, or look out of the window, or doodle a bit, or, make a cup of tea. Yeah, and those are good for us. And those we show, and people's attention is actually better after those. So there's research from Germany showing that.
Hang on, this is one thing that it's just picking up on what you just said.
Yeah.
isn't there a danger that this idea of rest is a good thing? It's only a good thing because it makes us more productive for the man once we've rested. Why can't we just kind of rest for its own sake? Why do we have to kind of excuse it with figures about how much more productive it makes us, after the rest?
Yeah, I think you have to remove the guilt. And so we found that 9% of people told us they felt really guilty whenever they rested. And what
90%?
9%. 9%.
Oh, 9%. Oh, that's not so bad.
Yes, but they felt very guilty whenever they rested.
91% don't feel guilty.
Every time. But these was very guilty. Yeah. But I think that, and what is really interesting is though, that if I tell people it makes them more productive afterwards, they don't feel guilty about it. And then they allow themselves to rest. And so in one way, it is a way of reassuring people that it's all right. But I know what you mean, because I think, rest is good for its own sake. It hasn't got to make you more productive. But in a way, if you want bosses to allow people to have breaks, unfortunately, you have to tell bosses that, yes, this will make them more productive. You're not going to lose out on their time. And of course, some places now have where people are really regimented in some sorts of workplaces and warehouses and things, or they are timed, on their toilet breaks and have no autonomy over when they're having a break at all, which also, of course, makes people feel tighter and less refreshed.
So do you think that depresses people? Do we have an overwork problem, or do you think the overwork problem is actually kind of getting better because of lockdown? You're doing lots of COVID work and lockdown work and stuff like that. I mean, what have you seen over the last 6 months?
Oh, I think it's got worse. If you look at, obviously there's been some people who've been working really hard doing, obviously, key workers and people working in hospitals and so on, and people, trying to find us vaccines or are working extraordinary hours. But more in general, if you look at the research that's been done on working hours in the last 6 months, people are working longer hours when they work from home. So rather than gaining that commute time is turning into work. And also because people are at home, they're not stopping, because when's the moment when you need to stop? Whereas at least if you've gone somewhere else, in the end, you have to come home, which is why, I think it's a genuinely good idea that some people do, is to do a commute to work from home, to walk around the block at the start of your day and to walk around the block at the end of your day. And that signals it coming and going. And if at all possible, and of course, this depends on where people are working and how many other people are trying to work in the same home, to ideally not work in your bedroom, but we know that a quarter of under 25-year-olds are working from home in their bedrooms, but to be able to put work away.
What about working from the bed?
From the bed, yeah.
From the bed.
Sitting on their beds, yeah.
That's quite good, isn't it?
What, because you can have a sleep?
Yeah, you can sort of like doze off in between. You're resting and working at the same time.
It's very bad for your sleep at night, though, because then you don't associate your bedroom with sleeping. You associate your bedroom with work. So you need to put it out of the way. If it is the same room, put it out of the way so you can't see it. But also, I think that the blending of work and leisure that's come about anyway through technology, and the fact that you can be contacted in the evening and emailed all the time, has almost got worse, I think, while people are working from home. And now I know some people love working from home. Some people have absolutely love this. If they don't like going into work, for some people, this is a dream. And it's really interesting looking at the research that's been done on mental health during the pandemic. Some people's mental health has improved because of working from home if they didn't like where they were working, whereas a lot of other people's has got worse.
Yeah, well, what's the proportion of that? We did a piece in the Idler about the first category. People are saying, actually, my mental health has improved. We read a lot about mental health, not getting better because of the stresses and stuff. Do you have any idea what the sort of? And then I was thinking, well, which is it? Are more people happier with this kind of more potentially restful situation, or are there more people who are more depressed by it?
Yeah, so there are more people who are depressed by it, but that is the whole situation, of course. So that is also feelings of loneliness and not being able to see your friends and not being able to go out, and the lack of choice of anything to do, and so the working up from home is just one of those things. So there's a bigger proportion who have found it more difficult and whose mental health has got worse. Some particularly if people had pre-existing mental health problems. There are also, interestingly though, so it's a significant proportion of people, but a much smaller proportion of people whose mental health has got better. And some of those are also people with pre-existing mental health problems who have found it easier because the rest of the world now isn't pressuring them to do things. And almost they're staying in, and what they wanted to do was stay in. And now that's completely allowed. That's the right thing to do and a great thing to do.
Yeah, so
and no one's trying to make them do anything else. Yeah, and that almost everyone's slightly, that they couldn't go out because of the effect that their mental health issues were having on them, and now everyone else is in the same boat. And I interviewed quite a few people who were saying that they sort of felt so much better knowing everyone else was in the same boat, and that now maybe other people would understand them a bit better.
Yeah, and there's the kind of sense that life has got kind of slightly less competitive.
Yes, I think there is definitely that. And I think that might be something that people keep talking about, what are the good things that they can take from this and what things will stay afterwards. I mean, I'm always slightly skeptical about this, life's changed forever, everything's going to be different forever, because we get into habits very easily. And also humans are very, very adaptable. So we have adapted to it. We may not like it, but we have adapted to this. Some people have found the things they like from it. And also we will go back and adapt to how it was before, because we had habits formed over years and years and years before. And so we will go back to those, just as it's not the case that in August, say, and September, when people could do more, it's not the case that nobody said, oh, well, I'm not interested in ever going out to eat again. People went to do that. So I think a lot of things we will go back to, but I think some things people will deliberately try to hold on to. And I think working from home some of the time is definitely going to be one of those. Now that everybody has worked out that it is doable. Some things are harder, some things take longer doing them at home. But I think it will be so much rarer for people to have to go in 5 days a week. And I think that will be a good thing. If you can get a balance between it, I think that will be a good thing.
Yeah, it's just a good thing. I mean, I think because, it's the autonomy that people feel. If you've got control over your day,
yeah,
a little bit more, then you feel a bit less kind of slave-like.
Yeah, the autonomy makes a massive difference. And of course, there are the downside, people talking about Zoom fatigue and, missing seeing their colleagues properly and feeling just exhausted by endlessly having to stare at the screen all the time, depending on what sort of job they're doing. But I think that some of the working from home, the good bits, I think will stay, because people have worked out the technology now. So everyone's linked up in order to do it. Now,
let's look at your number one piece of advice for rest. It's reading. And as we said earlier, this is it's not your choice of top 10 things. It's what came back from the research of these people. That's interesting, because you would have thought it would be something like just flopping out, or I don't know, as you said at the beginning, drinking beer. I would have put it number one. I mean, that's tremendously encouraging, actually, for those of us who think that everyone's got lost into screens, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is. And I think it's really interesting that nothing on screens, apart from, TV is at number 9, but that's the only thing that's on a screen that's in the top 10 at all. So 58% of people put down reading as the most restful activity. And what I think is really interesting about this is, at first we did wonder, is everyone just trying to look good? Are they just saying reading but lying, really? But thousands of people were also completely prepared to put down doing nothing as being their top activity. So I think we have to take people at face value there. I think that reading is really interesting in terms of telling us quite a lot about the essence of rest, actually, because what we know about people when they read is that there's been quite a lot of research done by psychologists on what's known as, rather judgmentally, as mindless reading, which is where you get to all the way to the bottom of the page and you realize you haven't taken in a single word of it.
But that's not bad. That's still restful.
But it is restful. It's great because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you do that. And they can tell whether people are doing that or not, because you can use eye tracking devices, and their eyes still go across the page and all the way down to the bottom. But if you're really reading, we slow down when we get to a long word or to an unfamiliar word, just by like a millisecond, we slow down. But we don't slow down if we're doing mindless reading. And so they're able to tell that for quite a lot of the time, a lot of people are doing mindless reading, but that's okay, because it seems that reading, whether it's fiction or non-fiction, is almost a jumping off point to the daydreaming that we were talking about at the beginning, and that this allows them to escape from their own lives and escape from those thoughts going round and round in their head. And I think that the essence of rest is something that allows you to escape from repetitive thoughts that are going around in your head and to get away from those worries. And it can be something, it can be exercise, it can be running. 8% of people told us they found running the most restful thing, and that they couldn't relax their minds until they'd relaxed their bodies. So I think reading allows us to escape from our own lives and to be alone. So you haven't got that worry of thinking about other people and taking them into consideration, but also being in company. So because you've got the company of the characters or the people in the book. And so I think reading can be, really powerful. And it's interesting, actually, the studies on reading have almost been done by accident, because I hunted for studies on how relaxing reading might be, and whether it is or not, and comparing with other things. And what I found in the end was various studies of yoga and Tai Chi, where they compared doing, say, 20 minutes yoga with doing 20 minutes of reading, and then, measured people's heart rate and blood pressure and so on, and asked them how relaxed they felt. And I strongly suspect that these studies were attempting to show how very restful yoga or Tai Chi were. And they chose as their control condition reading, and they accidentally chose something that's really restful, thinking they were choosing something rather neutral. And so in all those studies, they come out as equal, that the yoga and the reading are equally restful and equally relaxing, and both very effective. But equally. So again, I think it's a question of these top 10 activities won't be, people need to pick their combination of activities that might work for them. It's not that you can prescribe the same activities for everybody. It's a question of finding a combination of them.
The other point you make about reading, which is great, is that with reading, you bring your own time to it. So when you're watching telly, more or less, I know you can sort of pause it, but you're in someone else's universe completely. With a book, you can drift off, you can stop, or you can come back. Obviously, you're conjuring up the images in your mind. So in a way, it's a more autonomous process.
I think it is, yes, because as you say, you're creating the world rather than having that world created for you. And you'll always remember that world. And it's like if you read a book when you're on holiday, the book might be set in Berlin, but if you happen to be in Spain, it's sort of always half in Spain in your head forever. And it's a sort of combination of those two places. And so you've almost invented, every time a new reader reads it, they're inventing their own experience of it that no one else can ever quite experience in exactly the same way. And you can go back, you can savor the bits that you really want to read. It's up to you what you do. Yeah,
so it's quite a creative act, really, actually, reading.
Yeah, it is. And that's why I think it's interesting that it's restful, because it's definitely cognitively taxing. You've got to, even just the fact you've got to read the words, translate, if you like, for your mind, those words into sounds and language, and then think about what that means, and then remember what else happened earlier in the book and what that means. And at the same time, you might also reflect on your own life. You look at a character and you may empathize with them, but also think, oh, but would I have done that? No, I wouldn't do that. I can't believe that. And there's so many different things going on so many different levels cognitively, that it involves a lot of effort, which is why it's really intriguing that so many people find it so restful.
Do you mention that being read to or reading out loud is also a lovely thing to do?
Yes, I do. Yes. And my husband reads to me often at night, and I fall asleep straight away. And usually if I'm trying to get to sleep on my own, I can't get to sleep for ages.
Well, because it's sort of so boring.
It's exactly. He says he does all the voices, but I'm not convinced.
You've got no idea because you're fast asleep.
Yeah, who knows? I'm asleep. So honestly, we have read so many books where he then précises what happens the next day and tells me what's happened, and so that I can understand the next bit. But he has to carry on reading for several pages or a chapter, really. Otherwise, I wake up again. Has to carry on reading. But there is something absolutely lovely, I think, and so restful about someone reading to you. And now there are loads of there are loads of audiobooks deliberately aimed at this. There are, as well as audiobooks of novels that are out there, there are deliberately boring stories that have been written with really long descriptions of a field in Provence, but where nothing exciting ever happens, because that would keep you awake, read in a lovely soporific tone, and lots of people swear by these tips. I haven't tried these, but lots of people swear by them.
Yeah, well, I might try and write a boring book.
You can do it really well. You get thousands of downloads. It's worth it.
Okay, now one last point. I think scanning down them and having delved into your book, I expected beer to be in there, as we said. By the way, what are you drinking? What sort of beer have you got there?
It's an Asahi beer.
Ah, lovely, Japanese.
Yes, very nice.
And is creativity? I mean, surely, whatever it is, making things is restful to people.
Yeah, it's interesting. Doing creative things was in the top 15. I think it's about number 14, I'd say, from memory, 14 or 12. And lots of people obviously find that very, very therapeutic and relaxing. And then the other one that disappointed me, because it's my favorite, is gardening. Gardening was number 12, so I didn't get to write a chapter about gardening. I find gardening so restful that there is just, even though again it's physically taxing, it's mentally taxing. If you're planning, I have just planted hundreds of bulbs in hopefulness of a nice spring, and that's taxing, planning where to put them all and how to do it and what to do next and what to do about the dead plants and why it's gone wrong. Yet so relaxing for those who like it. But again, if you made everyone do it, lots of people would hate it. So with all of these things, it is about finding the ones that do work for you.
Yeah, you don't have to be you don't have it imposed on you.
Yeah.
There's quite a funny modern toss cartoon we just got sent of a bloke going into a seed shop and saying, I want to grow my own food. Have you got any pizza seeds? Okay, Mark, let's quickly go to you, and then Victoria's probably storing up a few questions from our audience.
Yeah, so this is if you've got questions, then do feed them to Victoria right now. But Claudia, I know that you quoted Socrates at one point on the beware the barrenness of a busy life.
Yeah.
And it's one of those sayings of Socrates that can get interpreted, I guess, in lots of ways. But is it linked to his reflection on, the unexamined life is not worth living? That if you're too busy, you haven't really got time to even contemplate what it might be all about.
I think that's right. I think there are some people, and you can find yourself doing it, who you pack the time and pack time with things to do, and then you don't have to think. And I think that might be one of the reasons why suddenly having fewer things that you can do, fewer opportunities, has meant that people have to think more about the people that they are living with and what's happening there, and to really reflect on what they want. And I think that one thing a lot of people are saying that they have done during lockdowns is to reflect and to think about, well, what is really important to them and what are the things they're going to get round to doing. And lots of people are saying how they want to really value their friendships more afterwards and see their friends and families more afterwards, because they've really missed not being able to do that, and maybe realizing that that's something they really want to do. And I think another thing that might change afterwards, although this won't help the economy, which is obviously in need of some help, is I wonder whether after the first excitement, when shops are open again, whether people will start buying slightly less, whether consumerism will have a bit of a dip in terms of people buying things that they don't really need, and whether people are going to start doing going to the park with carrying on going to the park with their friends, or walking, or doing things that they have been able to do.
That's interesting about friendship, because sometimes it's said that a really good friend when you can do nothing together. Yeah,
I think that's absolutely true. And because doing nothing, we know, is really hard. And so although the idlers are probably very good at it, it's there are famous experiments where people will rather give themselves an electric shock rather than sit in a room doing nothing at all.
That's really
it's so difficult.
Unbelievable. Yeah. Who are those people? They've been badly trained by the lizards or something. But Claudia, when is your radio show on? Can you just give us a bit of a plug for that before we go on?
Yeah,
to
so I present All in the Mind on Radio 4, which is the current series is on at the moment. So it is on Tuesday evenings at 9 p.m. and it's repeated at 3:30 on a Wednesday, and there is a podcast of that. And then I present Health Check on the World Service and The Evidence on the World Service, which is all about the pandemic, but in real detail, so that we get some of the real sort of nuance and really talking to the scientists there. Those are both World Service programs, but they're podcasts as well.
Wow, so you're quite busy.
I've had a busy pandemic. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's been good
Yeah.
for me.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go to some questions then.
Yes, could we have Sarah Talbot first, please, and then Phil Danter. We've got a question from Chris as well. So if you line yourselves up, let's go to Sarah first.
Hi, Victoria. Hi, everybody.
Hi, Sarah.
My question really, you both mentioned the 90s, and I remember fondly the working lunches,
Sarah, we can see half your face. Just move up a little bit.
There we go.
There we go.
So what has changed in society to bring us to now, where people are working harder, working longer, and having a lot less fun, a lot less play?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I think that a lot of companies worked out how to be leaner and how to make everyone work harder, and just have had cuts in staff. And then I think obviously there's been also the development of technology, which sometimes saves us time and frequently doesn't save us time. And so the amount of time that people are spending answering emails, just managing their own emails is huge. And I think that it has just become assumed that you must work as hard as possible, and that it's okay for employers to do that, and that it's okay not to have that hour's lunch break anymore. I mean, I think that's it's a terrible shame. I don't think it's right that employers can just get people working harder and harder.
Is that really true?
Things
People
just
don't
have got
take
more
their lunch break?
competitive.
I mean, when we had idler staff, we kept saying you must take at least an hour for lunch. Do people really not take an hour for lunch?
I think a lot of people don't take an hour for lunch now. Lots of people eat their sandwiches at their desks. And in fact, one of the questions that we had in the rest test was about how often you eat your lunch on the go. And that turned out, how often do you eat on the go was the question. And that question turned out to be a really strong predictor of how much rest people got. So we could ask all these other questions about rest. And actually, we found that all you needed to really ask was how often do you eat your lunch on the go? And the people who eat their food on the go all the time are not other people who are not getting many lunches. And I think it's particularly gone in terms of people on 0 hours contracts and lots of places, lots of sandwich shops and so on. People are often, they're having to work the exact amounts that you have to work before you can have a proper break, and so they have 1/2 an hour break, and they don't have more than that. And that employers are working out the shifts so that there is as few breaks times as possible, so to get their money's worth.
Terrible.
Very sad.
Next.
Phil, are you there?
Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah, hi, Claudia. Phil. Yeah.
Hello.
Now, I don't want to be a contrarian here, but
Oh, go on.
data in relation to my own work and I don't know who these people are. They're called Huberman and Mills, and they published some work in 2007 that actually charted working hours since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And it actually shows that working hours have never been lower than they are now. My thought here is that because there is this badge of honor, as you mentioned, about busyness, that maybe people are just lying about how busy they are.
Well, it's a really interesting point, actually, because the time use surveys are really interesting, because lots of people will say that they believe that people now have a lot less spare time than they had in the 1950s. And if you look at time use surveys from the 50s and onwards, we actually have a little bit more spare time than people used to have, but it doesn't feel that way. And so I think what is interesting in a way is why we feel busier than ever, if perhaps in fact we're not. and that we have this idea that, and I think part of that is the always being on call, and that being on call so that someone can email you in the evening is inherently restless, even though you're not actually working. Unless you get that, that email and are required to do something, you're not actually working, but your mind is slightly working on it, just knowing you're available. And it's a bit like people, I've got friends who are, airline staff, air stewards, and they would say that, and sometimes when there were flights going a lot, they would be on call rather than actually go and do a flight. So they couldn't leave the house. They had to be ready to go in case they needed to go. But often they didn't have to go. And the rest of us would say, oh, this is nice. You just get to sit around all day. And they didn't think it was very nice because their day was ruined in a way by knowing they might have to work. And I wonder a bit whether that is a bit what's happening as well. So I think there's the status thing, and then also the merging of the boundaries between work and leisure. And so maybe in the 1950s, if people were really literally working 9 till 5, then at 5 o'clock they came home and no one could get them.
Yeah. Phil, I think your survey takes as its comparison point a relatively recent event. The Industrial Revolution was only about 200 years ago. You need to go back a little bit further, perhaps to the great medieval period, to find when people had a better work-life balance. Anyway, sorry to interrupt, Vic.
No, I think it's good.
Okay.
Thanks, Phil. Thanks, Claudia. Chris Crossley.
Hi guys, I've got the same yellow background.
Oh, that's good.
That you've got. I don't know why it isn't yellow in here. I am going to sort it out.
Well, somebody interestingly, somebody put right at the beginning, I saw a message flash up really fast with somebody saying what the answer was. So I'd like to know that before we go, because it's one of the messages right at the beginon. Somebody says what the answer is to the yellow thing.
I'll share the chat with everybody afterwards, Claudia, and it's in there.
Okay.
I noticed that it's your camera is on daylight hours or something, or
genius.
so you'll have to go to your
down.
Preferences and change the camera.
I'm writing that down right now.
Thanks, Vic. I like the technical support there, Victoria.
I'm getting so techie.
Service.
Okay, Chris.
Okay, go on, Chris.
To get to my question, sorry. Do you think that if the survey was done now, Claudia, that it would show the same top 5, 10 that it was when this experiment was done, or when your survey was done?
That's such a good question. That's such a good question. I wonder whether, so being on your own came at number 3, and I wonder whether that would be the case because so many people are missing their friends and family, and that even people who don't live on their own are missing that they can't see other people. So I wonder whether being on your own would be in it anymore. I wonder whether watching TV would still be in the top 10 because that's one of the few options. So I wonder whether that would be something that people find as restful anymore. And so I think what we would find is that those socializing ones, the ones about socializing and chatting and maybe drinking socially, came much higher. And it's interesting because what we did look at people's personalities as well. And so when we just took the extroverts, we thought, oh, surely then socializing will come in the top 10. And interestingly, it still didn't, suggesting this was something that was across the board of people wanting to have some peace. But I think those are the main things that would change. I think doing nothing might not come as high, except I think we've been split up into some people are bored and haven't got enough to do, and then some people, particularly when people were trying to say homeschool kids and work from home for the first time and trying to work all the technology, and or if people were key workers and trying to and people working in hospitals and so on. I think we've been split up into, there's some people working really, really hard, there's others looking for things to do, and I know at the beginning, I can remember some people who were working really hard in hospitals saying it was really annoying them, people sort of saying, oh, I don't know what to do, so I'm going to have to make some bread.
Claudia, your doing nothing chapter is actually called Doing Nothing in Particular.
Yes.
Which is quite an almost archaic choice of phrase. It was used in the kind of logo we have for our Idler drinks, which comes from Jerome K. Jerome's Idler magazine, 1901. We had a feature called the Idlers Club, where the sort of bits of the editors discussed a certain subject for discussion, and generally it would say subject for discussion, nothing in particular. It's a very sort of English phrase. Why did you choose that phrase rather than just saying doing nothing?
Because I think that doing nothing in particular then can incorporate pottering, and I think that doing nothing on its own does suggest, or to me suggests, literally lying on the sofa, but staying awake, because I'm talking about everything I'm talking about with rest is when you're awake.
Yeah, so
And so I think
in
that,
particular could have been sort of doing anything really.
yeah, well, doing nothing in particular, I think means more, wandering about at home. You could be, sort of tidying up a bit, but not cleaning, not making a proper effort, and sitting and then looking on your phone a bit, and then, maybe glancing at a newspaper, but not really, not. Yeah.
Great.
So
Well,
it's a kind of melange. It allowed the melange of things. Yeah, it's a nice thing, I think.
A delightful melange. Now, who's next, Beck?
Lovely. We've got Paul Moyner. Are you there? You ask your question. Paul, still there? If not, Andrew McFadden. Are you there, Andrew? Are you still there?
Sorry, I've
got Paul. Brilliant.
Yes, I'm sorry. I got it muted. My question was basically about the definition of the word rest. I agree with virtually everything that Claudia and everybody's been saying, and I think all these activities, the list in your, the rest compendium and whatever, make you feel better. But I disagree with the use of the word rest to describe a lot of them. And I think that I'm interested to know whether the Oxford English Dictionary, because certainly when I looked it up, I've been trying to get a full one. Now with libraries closed, it's difficult, but certainly some years ago, it didn't include anything you're talking about. Claudia and her colleagues are talking about. But my background is I'm a retired surgeon, and I was old enough to be brought up at a time when to treat anybody, to make them better, required rest. And that was rest by meaning doing nothing. Now, I'm very sad. I was actually studying all the history of this at the Wellcome colleagues, and I did actually write you a letter, but you didn't get to think. And I had hoped that the Wellcome is, if nothing else, is the sort of headquarters for the study of the history of medicine. And for about 100 years, the rest was the cornerstone of all treatment. That's how you had things like TB sanatoriums. It's how you had the Americans had a fashion of, for a while, of putting you to bed for mental things, either hysteria or what they called neurasthenia, and you were shut up in a room. You had to rest your eyes. The curtains were drawn, and interestingly enough, you weren't allowed to read, contrary to what you have there. And there were a lot of quite feisty women at the time, like Virginia Woolf and others. A famous book, I'm trying to remember the author.
Charlotte Perkins.
Who protested like mad about it. And I was taught as a medical student and practiced for the first few years this idea that you rested people. And it was only when I had I've been about 15 years practicing as a consultant, as a surgeon, when a young doctor at the end of a busy day in the operating thing asked me, one of the first times I felt I was old, what was it like in your day, sir? And I went through all the sort of, the big advances, the sort of sexy sort of advances you hear about, penicillin, well, not that, but it was orthopedics, artificial joints, and how we were now operating on lots of broken bones and things like that. And, that's what I thought he wanted to hear. But when I was going home, I'm just picturing, driving home, what it was actually like when I was a medical student and a young doctor just training in the hospital. And one of the things was that you had wards in which people were just lying about, mainly doing nothing. And that was because we doctors forced them to do that. You said you can't.
Is that still the case, Claudia, that, that rest is prescribed by doctors?
Well, what's interesting is when you look up, if you look in to see where rest has been written about in academia, in journals, the main place you find it more recently, say, is nursing journals. And so there is some discussion of it in nursing journals.
I agree, because one of the I was finding in your book, I think it's maybe I can't remember, it was the compendium rather than the recent book. There was an Australian, I think, nurse or American nurses, and that was actually all about how you. But you didn't take it on board because they were querying the use of the word rest. So I would like to challenge that I don't think rest is the right word for all the things you describe. And I think somebody should be using something, because I think it's confusing.
Well,
real rest is doing nothing.
Yeah, well, what word should Claudia be using?
I don't know. There were odd suggestions. It's a change. It's a
idling. Idling.
Idling.
It is. Well, it's not necessarily idling, because I would agree with you.
Let's just go back to Claudia. We're literally just
we're at the end, yeah.
I would agree with you that idling, gardening, is very physical.
Yeah.
But I agree with you, it's very pleasant and good for your mind. So what word you use for that, I don't know.
Claudia, let's have a quick defense of the word rest from you.
Yeah, so we concluded actually that the word rest wasn't well defined. So I'm absolutely with you on that it's not well defined. And that in fact, when you look in the nursing journals and when you look at what doctors mean when they prescribe rest, it's very rarely explained what that actually means. Do you have to be in bed? Do you have to sit on the sofa? Are you allowed to do anything? And that some people will misinterpret that and think, oh, I can rest. That means I can see my friends and do fun things. And they mean rest and recreation. And so what we decided to do in the rest test was to allow people to define what they considered restful and what they considered rest. And so these activities are the things that other people defined as restful. So some people do believe these things are restful, including running. And that is how they are defining it. So we allow people, because it's not well defined, we allow people to define it themselves.
So Claudia, thanks so much for coming for this hour. It's absolutely fascinating. It's good for you to give up an hour, and it's been quite relaxing, I think.